Hello and welcome. This is video number 4 in a 5-part series about nationalism. And in today's video, the focus is going to be on the impact that feelings of nationalism had on China gaining a degree of independence. We're going to take a look at China during the 1800s and how they went from being in a relatively powerless position due to their isolation and relative lack of technology compared to countries who had an interest in interacting with them, and how they would really rally from that position of really getting pushed around by other countries for a number of years to kind of renew their focus on China and putting China first. So hopefully this will be a helpful video in to be used to illustrate the impact of nationalism, and in this case, the impact in China. So I hope you enjoy the video. So we're going to start first with China, and the story with China. I guess the place to start is just to speak to the fact that historically this has been a country that's been relatively isolated. If you look at China through the centuries, they've typically had the perspective that they have all the things that they want and need, and as a result, they weren't interested in interacting with foreigners, setting up trade arrangements, things like that. Really, the only exceptions that we've addressed in this class to that would be some of the time when they engaged in some voyages with Zheng He. You might remember Sea Admiral Zheng He. But outside of that, which just lasted a couple decades, they mostly have kept to themselves. And so that was true for China, getting through the 1600s, 1700s into the 1800s. And throughout that time, there were a lot of places that wanted to trade with them, and basically China either would say no, or if they did make some kind of trading arrangement, that would always be on their terms. So any foreign country that was able to trade with China at various times always did so on China's terms with China's advantage. And of course, different countries, especially European countries and also the United States, who wanted to trade, wanted things, if nothing else, to be on more equal terms. So as we look at China getting into the 1800s, we begin to see their ability to resist foreign interests in their country change. Now that change ends up coming, at least in large part, due to Europeans looking for and finding a product that they could put into China that China wouldn't be able to resist. And that product ended up being opium. Now, opium was something that did have some medicinal use and some medicinal value, but that's not the kind of arrangement that some of these European countries, England in particular, were looking to do. They weren't looking to be a pharmaceutical rep for China. They were looking to get opium into China for recreational use. And one of the biggest reasons being it's a very addictive substance. So if they could get it in and get people using it, it would be something that would be in demand and would continue to be in demand. And especially if more people got hooked on it, even more people would demand it. So basically, countries like England became a drug dealer for the country of China. And as I'm sure you can imagine, Chinese leadership in particular didn't really appreciate countries like England trying to push a drug into their country. What this ultimately leads to in China is something called the Opium Wars. China did make an appeal to England in particular to stop selling this drug. One of the things that they said when they made the appeal is, this drug's not legal to use this way in your own country, yet you push it into our country this way. And so they were very frustrated. There was no response from England about this. England kept doing what they were doing with trying to push opium into China, and it did result in a war. Unfortunately for China, they began to learn the hard way at this time part of the price of relative isolation, and that was they didn't have nearly as advanced tools as England did. China hadn't experienced a lot of what came with the Industrial Revolution in the same way that England had at this point. So England had superior ships, in particular, superior steam-powered gunships that proved to really overpower what China could throw at them. So China ended up being defeated. There was a treaty made between the two countries called the Treaty of Nanjing. Among other things, it gave England access to the island of Hong Kong and basically allowed England to have their way with China and trade and interact in China as they wanted to. And so China was beginning to find itself feeling very vulnerable and powerless. Now, it wouldn't stop just with England. Shortly after the British treaty was made, countries like the United States made deals with China to get into China for business. This was referred to as extraterritorial rights, which basically just gave countries like America, countries like England, access to Chinese ports. It also exempted them from a lot of the laws that China had, so that basically these foreign countries that were engaged in trading activities could pretty much do whatever they wanted, sell whatever they wanted, basically had free reign. And one of the things this would start to do, though, and as this ties in with the topic of nationalism, is it would begin to stir some feelings within the Chinese people of anger and frustration at the fact that foreign countries were simply coming into their country and doing whatever they wanted. And so they were frustrated by that, and they were also frustrated by the fact that they didn't see that their government and their government leadership was able to do anything to stop it either. Now, this leads to kind of the focal point of nationalism, or the development of nationalism in China, which was an event known as the Boxer Rebellion. Now, the Boxer Rebellion was ultimately started by a group of people that the fancy name I like to use is the Society of Harmonious Fists, nicknamed the Boxers. Basically, they were just this group of people that had grown quite angry by the end of the 1800s at the fact that foreigners were having their way in China, and it didn't seem like the Chinese government was going to be able to do anything to stop it. And so they were frustrated with the Chinese government. They were frustrated with foreigners. And so they put this little group together. And I added this in the notes that one of the kind of quirky things about them is they believed essentially that they were invincible. So as they prepared to potentially do battle against whoever it maybe was that they might do battle against, they thought that they couldn't be shot and harmed with guns, for example. So if this group ever did act, it was going to be interesting to see how it might go. Now, they would get their opportunity not too long after forming in the event that's called the Boxer Rebellion. Just as a time reference, this took place in 1900. And basically what happened is the Boxers began fighting against Europeans living and working in the European section of Beijing. And what just kind of began as a fight would end up lasting a few months. So this went on for a little while. Ultimately, though, the Boxers would be defeated. The different foreign countries that were involved with the fighting and were at risk of losing the power and control they had did ultimately work together. They defeated the Boxers. Nothing the Chinese government really tried to do had much effect at supporting the Boxers, and they were defeated. And so you might see this as a loss for China. But if you look forward, I think in a lot of ways you can actually see this as somewhat of a victory, in so much as it really did show the Chinese people that they needed to work together to resist foreign influence in their country. And so feelings of nationalism that hadn't necessarily been terribly evident before really rose to the surface. And so when you look at China moving forward from this point, you see a very different perspective on their place in the world and how they interacted with people around the world, and just some of the steps they would take to become more self-sufficient again and more control of their country.